Now, the area we work in Tanzania is one specific area, and it's called, it's down in southwestern Tanzania near the borders with Malawi and Zambia and Mozambique. And it's quite remote. It's not on the main routes of tourists and business, etc. So there are not many NGOs down there. So the average income in that particular area, we estimate, is about 70 cents a day. In the villages that we work in, there's very little infrastructure. So, there may be a few places, many villages have no electricity whatsoever. Over half, or maybe more than half, don't have electricity. No running water, no paved roads. The roads that they are extremely rough when it rains. It's like driving on ice. You slide off the road, or you just get stuck in the mud. Very few support services. I mean, the government tax base is only 70 cents a day. So, for the whole of Rungwe district where we work, and in Rungwe district there are 32 wards, about 240 villages. There's one social worker with an assistant and a student. The number of orphan children that social worker has to care for in the villages that we work in, 30% of the kids are orphaned or most vulnerable. I will use the term most vulnerable a lot this evening because I think it's more appropriate than orphaned. And it's a term that is used by the Tanzanian government. And basically, a child who is most vulnerable could be orphaned. They could be looking after parents that are sick and dying. They could have parents, but they have so little resources that they're basically near starving all the time. The thing that is really key for us that we discovered, and in the video talked about building an orphanage, but the beautiful thing about the culture there is that in the villages, every child goes to a home. So you can imagine living in a community that's very poor and 30% of the kids don't have a home. And yet every child goes to a home. That is just a remarkable and beautiful thing. So there are no street children, despite the poverty and despite the sheer volume of kids that need a care and need a home. I mean, that was another reason why building an orphanage was just dumb, right? For a Westerner, it seems the obvious solution. The thousands of orphans, right? We better build some orphanages, something. But it's, just not a good thing. Problems there are just so immense. The poverty, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of services, and the sheer volume of kids and the number of people who have HIV/AIDS. We really don't know in these countries and these places how many people have AIDS. It's estimated officially by the official count that in that particular region it's about 9%. Well, we know for a fact that in those villages it's a minimum of 30% of the kids are orphaned. And how are they orphaned? The thing is that all medical statistics anywhere in the world are counted in a medical facility. Well, most of these villages don't have a clinic, so there's nowhere for people to go to be assessed, whether they've got anything, ringworm or AIDS or whatever it is. So, we just don't know what these what the situation really is. So these villagers do need help. One of the most important lessons I learned was from, I was in South Africa, and I was talking to the editor of the South African Medical Journal, a delightful man, Dr. Daniel Nysenyama, and this was in 2001 when I met with him. And we were talking about HIV/AIDS and the problems, and in particular, we were talking about South Africa. And he said to me, you know, Barry, we in South Africa, so this is 2001, we in South Africa have had all the money and resources we need to solve the AIDS problems. He said, you know, we've had everything we need. He said, there are just two problems. He said, first of all, that every cent that comes here, whether it be from Washington, Berlin, London, Paris, wherever, comes with a Western agenda. You know, the people who sat down and said, well, how's this money going to be spent, have done it in a Western context. So even if there were South Africans in that room, sitting there, you know, it's been in the some conference room at the Library of Congress or the Hilton or whatever, and the context for the decision making has been in a Western setting. And he said, secondly, that we as South Africans, we haven't sat down and decided what we want to do about HIV/AIDS. And that sort of always stuck with me. It's sort of right in the forefront of my mind of what Dr. Dan said. And it's, you know, so everything we've done at Africa Bridge, I've tried to remember that, you know, that the decision making for what happens in the villages needs to be made in the villages, under a tree, with villagers, and we can have some outside people, but they got to sit under the tree. We don't want them sitting in some conference room in Nairobi or Dar es Salaam or wherever it is. It needs to be in the context in which the villagers live. And secondly, we don't do anything in the villages without first meeting and having long meetings, first of all with children, because after all, this is about children. And so we have 3-day strategic planning meetings with children ranging in age from 8 to 21, and they're remarkable. When I told my friends I was doing my corporate meetings with kids, they thought I was off my nut. But, you know, these kids, 10-year-olds, some of the planning that they can do is remarkable. And I've got copies of plans that 10-year-olds have put together for, you know, 5 years ahead. And it's, you know, what they're going in their little minds is incredible. And people just can't comprehend it. And so we meet with these kids and really understand their context and get it in their words. And then we have the children's meetings. They elect representatives of the children. And then we have the children meet with the community leaders from all aspects of life, women's groups, farmers, local government, the local, if there is a local clinician, the school teachers, and they all come together and we put a 3-year plan together with the kids. And then form a steering committee, and then that steering committee guides everything that we do in those villages for a 5-year cycle that we work with these communities. So what we have figured out and do with the communities is basically empower and enable the villagers to provide those support services. Remember we said very few or no support services, and together with local government. So we do this with local government and other NGOs if they're around. And secondly, you know, the families themselves, all those children go to a family, and we work with those families that take those kids in and give them the capacity to provide what a child needs, you know, food, shelter, warmth. This is up in the mountains, it's cold. There's even one village, Ungumbulu, where it has snowed. It doesn't snow every year, but believe me, it's cold. You know, so they need warmth, they need blankets. Most of these kids don't have blankets. If you talk to these children, the one thing they want to do more than anything else is to go to school. In the village of Idweli, when we first went there, only 50% of the kids were in school, and what they wanted, even one meal a day, and they were always hungry, they talked about going to school before getting some more food in their bellies.